2040, the world's largest labor force will be in Africa, with an estimated working age population of 1 billion. According to the World Bank, 11 million youth are expected to enter Africa's labor market every year for the next decade. So that's going to create an immense wealth of a labor pool. Yet, we see this often at my firm, that companies seeking to do business in Africa continue to face a shortage of highly skilled local talent. This is often the result of a skills gap between what firms need and what Africa's young workforce is equipped for, leading to a challenge in recruiting and retaining top talent. Compounding this problem are existing issues that many countries are grappling with currently, including lack of access to primary and tertiary education, brain drain as young Africans choose to stay in places like the United States or other markets to pursue career opportunities, challenges of labor mobility as obtaining visas across the region can prove difficult, and continuing gender inequality in the workforce, among other issues. The continent's rising workforce also faces new challenges, such as a rapidly changing work environment, the rise of technology and the need for new skills, and workforce development programs have at times been slow to adapt to these changes. While governments must make a concerted effort to help correct this mismatch, the private sector is both a key partner and a lead innovator in workforce development, which is why I'm thrilled to have a chance to speak with our panelists today. So, one of the things I mentioned is that many top performers are attracted to US companies because of well-developed professional and career opportunities and development programs. This can lead to folks like you, Mandela Fellows, choosing to stay elsewhere rather than going back home to work. And so I'd like to talk to each of you about how your company thinks about growing a pipeline of talent in Africa. Michael, let's start with you. At IBM, you've really taken a long-term view towards skills development and come up with some innovative approaches that fit the African context. Can you tell us about IBM's approach?
Sure, and I'll maybe put this a little bit of context.
Please.
The technology industry is going through a significant transformation that's being driven by what we call big data and machine learning, or AI. And it's transforming how businesses, governments, and individuals interact and do business with one another. And it's impacting every sector of the economy. So the important thing to remember about technology is the impact of technology is most felt in traditional industries and in agriculture. And we're seeing that all over the world. I just wanted to throw a few stats out, if I could, just to give you a sense of this data revolution. Every 48 hours, human beings create the equivalent of all the data generated through human history up to the year 2003. And this has been made possible, of course, by the spread of the internet. And it's really been stunning. In 1994, less than 1% of the world's population had access to the internet. And today, that's 3.5 billion users, and we expect 5 billion by 2020. And we see that across Africa. So there's a huge amount of opportunity here. The challenge is, how do you create a skilled workforce to take advantage of this revolution in data and emerging technologies that are coming out of this data-driven revolution? The good news is this is a problem that is not unique to any single country. We have this issue, we have this challenge in the United States. We have this challenge in Europe and all of the emerging markets where we're doing business. And so some of the solutions that we're developing may be unique to certain countries, but what we're doing here in the United States, I think, is going to apply to Africa. And as part of that, we recently announced a Skills Africa campaign, model on a program we have here in the United States. We have a training program for what we call new-collar workers. And this is an idea that many of the skills around issues like cybersecurity, IoT, artificial intelligence don't require a university education. You don't have to have a college degree to be able to code, for example. And so we have been doing a lot of targeted outreach to workers who may be in industrial areas of the United States who don't have a college degree but can and are willing to be retrained in some of these new emerging areas. And in many of our facilities in the United States, up to a third of our employees don't have a college degree. So we're taking that approach and we're applying it to Africa, where we've launched a cloud-based learning platform. We're investing $70 million in partnership with the UN Development Program, where Africans at various levels in their education can take online learning classes around coding, for example, and we tailor these programs to be very specific to industries and to the needs of government or local groups in the countries they're operating in. And our hope is that we can train upwards to 25 million Africans across 30 countries in the next 5 years. And the focus has to be, though, in practical application of skills, and that's where we're really focused. It's one thing to learn coding, but it's another thing to learn coding for a specific end. If you're a farmer, for example, and you're working on data and revolutionizing agricultural products and practices, that is something that I think is going to help countries in Africa more than in other emerging or developed countries. So that's kind of our approach. We launched this last year, and already we're reaching about 2 million Africans through this cloud-based platform. And we're going to expand that over the next 5 years to, again, where I think we'll be able to impact at least 25 million Africans by 2020.
Thank you. Mike, Universal Corporation is looking at a much different sector of the labor pool in Africa. How do you think about pipeline development?
Well, as many of you have heard today, our role is in agriculture. And consequently, our needs for employees is a little bit different than maybe an IBM, and we're not providing quite the technical training that they're providing. But what we're looking at is more of how can we get someone into our business, train them on the practical side of the business, and promote them to being managers. Some of you have probably heard me say before, but that's our model, is to go in. We don't take a lot of expats in. We just go in, we start with the local people, we train them to do what we need done, and we leave them there to manage the operation and follow our corporate policies. So it's really a different dynamic, I think, than the technical side, and it's one that we found to be very successful. And I've relayed to several of you today. I use Mozambique as an example. We work with 120,000 growers there. When you multiply that by the size of the family, 5-6 people per family, and you start doing the numbers, we're working, with a lot of people there, and then we're employing thousands within our processing facility. So it's not a highly technical need. Now, obviously, we need management skills, and we're training folks. It's training. And how do we retain those people is because there's an international piece to it. They get exposed to an international colleague or potentially an international trip. So pretty exciting opportunity for some of the folks there.
Certainly. Jeff, turning to you, Kosmos Energy has invested in or is looking at investments in several different African markets. Does the labor pool play as a factor as you evaluate markets?
That's a good question, Cassady, and thank you again for having me on the panel. Thanks to the Chamber for hosting, and thanks to Presidential Precinct. I'm always excited talking to Yalis, whether it's on the continent or here in the U.S., so welcome to the U.S., all of you who are visiting. And I'd love to chat to discuss the idea of labor pool and a talented labor pool. Kosmos Energy is an offshore oil and gas exploration company. So we are searching for oil and gas a mile under the sea and then a mile under the ocean floor. So this is a highly, highly technical field. So over the years when we've gone into new countries, I'll give Ghana as an example. I just met a new friend from Ghana where Kosmos cut its teeth. We went in with skilled technical experts, expats, but we recognize that as part of our engagement, part of our work with the local communities, with the government of Ghana, we were committed to bringing on board a Ghanaian workforce. Now, initially, we had highly skilled expats filling a lot of technical roles, but over the 10 years that we've been in Ghana, we've actually put in place a plan to not only seek out Ghanaians that had the technical expertise we needed to continue our operations there, but actually to train those that were with us on increasing their levels of expertise to do bigger and bigger jobs, to the point where now we have a 100% Ghanaian workforce. So I think now we're just a small company. We have 250 people globally and 40 people in Ghana, but we went from having 0 Ghanaian staff to 40 over 10 years. Now, 10 years is a long time, but some of these technical areas are very specialized, and I'm very impressed to the extent that our Ghanaian colleagues have really answered the call and stepped up to be what is a very successful operation. When people think of Kosmos Energy and oil and gas, they think of Ghana. So as we're entering into new markets, that's our model. We've entered into Senegal and to Mauritania over the last year and a half. And although in some places, like in Senegal, our country manager is an expat, we've hired a lot of folks that have areas of technical expertise that we hope to enable over the years to take on greater and greater responsibility. So I think the Ghana model's there, both for Kosmos as well as for other companies that are looking to break into African markets, especially in a field as technical as oil and gas.
Great, that's an exciting model. So I know that Yali has really put a priority on diversity. And I'd like to ask each of you how you look at diversity in your companies when you're hiring in Africa. What can employers do to support greater participation from women, the LGBT community, or religious or ethnic minority groups in African markets? Mike, can we start with you?
Sure. We do not have a specific policy related to that, but we are working closely with the customers that are part of the UN Global Compact, and consequently, that's one of their principles. So we're very in tune with it. We're constantly trying to hire both gender. So it's, again, it comes back to us a matter of training, and we find that all people can handle the type of work that we have. So we're equal opportunity employer. So no, we don't have that policy per se at this point.
Great, thank you. Michael?
So IBM has long had a very forward-leaning policy around LGBT rights, ensuring that we are doing as much as we can to provide opportunities for women, particularly in countries where there may be challenges. So we've created a number of proactive policies, for example, tailoring jobs around working mothers to make sure that by having children, they're not put at a distinct disadvantage in terms of their career path. This is a program that we've rolled out not just in Africa, but all over the world. And we've had a lot of success. For example, if you're a working mom and you're an IBMer and you have to travel, IBM will pay to have your breast milk shipped, refrigerated and shipped to whatever you're heading to for business. And that's just one example. And here in the United States, for example, with the LGBT community, we've actually been very, very vocal in opposing laws that we see as discriminatory. We've had several senior executives, for example, in Texas last week, lobbying against a so-called bathroom bill, which we thought was discriminatory. And we've expanded that public policy focus in other markets. It's been at the top of our agenda in a lot of countries where we see discrimination as a major problem. And we're not afraid as a company to be vocal in opposition to policies that we see as discriminatory. And then in our own company policies, we try to develop proactive rules that will help minorities of all types of minorities to thrive in IBM.
Great. Jeff?
Well, I think our goal is to make our workforce in our office reflect the population that we're serving. And as I mentioned, our field is highly technical, but we have jobs within our offices that are not technical as well. But I'd say we've done a good job across the board, having our team in the office reflect the communities in which we work. Sure, it's good policy, but for us, it's a very practical issue in that we hope to know what our local communities think about our operations. We hope to be able to communicate to the local communities what we're doing and make sure that our local team has that our global team has the best plan on going forward. And without input from various sectors, represented by people that represent those sectors in the office, we're less capable of doing that. So for us, it's a very practical thing. Even with our small teams, we make sure we have a good gender balance, a good ethnic balance, good religious balance, good regional balance, and I think that that's worked very well for us in our 3-4 countries of operation. So once again, a good model on a small scale, but one that's easily replicated at a larger scale as well.
Right, thanks. Michael, IBM has a broad footprint across Africa. I'm interested in your experience related to labor mobility. We see this with clients at our firm, and I'm curious if it's been a problem at IBM in terms of wanting to hire African but not being able to bring Africans from Nigeria, for example, to South Africa.
It is a challenge. And it's not just a challenge in Africa. We have that challenge all over the world.
Good point.
Even here in the United States, over visa policies, work policies in terms of work visas. So, you have to make do as a company, right? You may be in a certain market and you don't have that specific skills or expertise. You need to bring in someone from outside. Governments may make it difficult to do that, and you just have to adapt. And there are ways we can do it, and it's easier for a big company like IBM because we have an army of lawyers and regulatory specialists whose sole job is to address these challenges. I think for small companies, I really don't know how they can cope, particularly if they're trying to expand across borders in Africa. So I don't think there's a single solution or silver bullet. You just have to be willing to adapt to each of the market conditions where you're operating, and just hope that you have some good immigration lawyers if you need them.
Mike or Jeff, anything to add on that?
Well, I was just visiting with one of the ministries in Congo Brazzaville, and I brought one of my colleagues who's Cameroonian, who's done some work for us in Senegal. Now, it's not always easy for him to get the visas he needs to work in countries other than his home country, but when he has, he's been amazingly effective for us. And it showcases how much when we're able to work around these policies or work with these policies to get our folks moving from one location to another, it helps us, it helps the new host governments, the new host communities, and it also helps our people become relevant in more than just their home country. So it is, I can't say it's not a challenge. I just came back from a global retreat for my team that we did in England, and 2 of our 7 staffers were not able to get visas from the British government in time. Now, that's not a problem unique to the British government. I certainly have our challenges in this country, but I will say the border issue continues to be problematic for us. Even as small as company we are, occasionally it's problematic. I would have loved to have had these colleagues with us. It would have helped them, it would have helped me, but it's a constant work in progress.
And I'll just add from our standpoint that it's amazing. Some of the challenges that we face are in countries where our business is very impactful to the GDP. And you would think that that would be a place where someone, where the country would be more receptive. But it's not. And I mentioned our model earlier, which is very simple. It's building up the local talent pool and having them to be the managers. But occasionally you do want to bring an expat in, and we're certainly faced with those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an ongoing struggle, I know. Jeff, you're someone who's leveraged your deep understanding of African markets to help translate that to a U.S. headquartered company. It strikes me that Mandela Fellows are uniquely placed as understanding the markets from which they come, but also the Western context, especially after spending your time with the presidential precinct this summer. I'm curious, Jeff, how you think top talent can leverage this unique experience in the African context.
Well, I can't say enough good things about the Mandela Fellows Program. I know it's intensely competitive, so congratulations already to all of you for getting accepted into it. I also know you've spent 6 weeks in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is one of the most beautiful places in the United States, so congratulations again for managing that. I think we're all jealous of you in that respect. But I will say the fellows, to the extent you're not already running Africa, I see going to be taking over that role over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, I'm amazed. Whenever I go to a country, especially for the first time, I always make it a point to connect with the Yalis in country because, look, I'm in the oil and gas industry. When I go to the country, I meet with the oil and gas ministry. I meet with the U.S. Embassy. I meet with the various people around that sector, but I don't get a broad cross-section of the population. Now, the Mandela Fellows are the best of the best, but I think they also represent the NGO sector, private sector, government sector, and also different, I mean, all young, but also different, men and women, young, but different ages within the youth, within the young demographic, but in ways that have been able to help educate me on the country, on our industry, on the way our industry is perceived, various things around politics, just across the board, an assessment of the culture and the community in ways that I wouldn't get from the U.S. Embassy, from my interlocutors in the government, and I always appreciate that. So that's very helpful to me, but that showcases just what value Mandela Fellows have in their own communities and across the continent. And I will say your networking is amazing. I mean, I know that Yalis get to know each other, especially in your 6 weeks here, but then you get to meet each other at the summit. The ongoing programs are great. This app to continue your engagement and networking going forward sounds just fantastic. So I think the fellows are a great resource for private sector. I'm saying that all the time to the White House, to the new administration coming, and just how valuable YALI is. And I don't think until you engage with YALI, you can appreciate just how impactful the YALI effort is.
Absolutely. I think what you said about the opportunity to network within the YALI community is really neat, and I hope that you all will go home and maintain the connections you've forged here. Michael, curious if you have a perspective on the value of this cross-cultural competency as well.
I'm sorry.
This cross-cultural competency of understanding this environment and translating it at home.
I do. I think, going back to what I said in my first set of remarks, is that this, at least in the technology industry, this transformation we're seeing really is breaking down borders. And if you're in any sort of traditional industry, or if you are working for an agricultural concern, I think there's no way that you can just limit yourself to your country. That particularly in Africa, where business now, I see it with our clients, are looking at Africa as in its entirety, as one giant market, huge potential. And companies are looking to do business across borders, and so in order to do that, you need relationships across borders. That's just a given, and I think as globalization is transforming the way enterprises of all sizes do business, and we're hoping that this is the type of program that's going to create those relationships to get governments and NGOs and other groups also talking to each other and breaking down those barriers that borders cause.
Yep. Mike, anything you'd like to add?
I think we're all on the same page with this. I'd like to offer up that this is the top talent. You will be successful, and I hope that you will look at funding opportunities that might, help this effort. And I think of folks like Bill Gates and whatnot that have been so successful, and I'm trusting that some of you are going to be equally as successful. And when you are, give back in the way that others have given back, and look at funding opportunities.
Yeah, and I know from talking to several of you that you're already giving back in big ways in your countries. I'd like to ask kind of a fun one now. I know a lot of us here in the US are increasingly looking at non-wage benefits when we evaluate career opportunities. We look at places like Google where you can get incredible perks like free massages on campus, things like that. Are any of you looking at non-wage benefits in the African context? So we're seeing research that's showing that Africans as well are looking at these too, whether it's leave allowances, family perks, things like that. Mike?
I'll start. Maybe not as much fun as you're talking about with the massage, but also not going to the technical side where we are providing that training, and it's training that an individual can use whether with our company or another company going forward. And that's something that we hear about, is that folks want that additional training that we can provide, that they may not be able to, well, they can work and get the training. And so that's definitely something that we're looking at and something we're hearing. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier the international piece that we can offer to folks as well, and that seems to be attractive.
It sounds like it. Michael?
We don't offer free massages, unfortunately. We're not as
Something
hip
to
as
think
these
about.
Silicon Valley companies. I will say IBM invests a lot in ongoing education for its employees, and this is particularly true in Africa. Our view is education is a lifelong experience, and I've experienced it, and I have actually colleagues in Africa who have been the beneficiaries of some of these programs, whether it's sending our IBMers back to school to get another degree, whether it's sending them to all different parts of the world to interact with different types of businesses to learn what else we're doing as a company. There's a lot of programs that we do internally that benefit our employees, but also benefit us, because it's in our interests to ensure that we can maintain a high retention rate. And as the African market grows, there is going to be a competition for talent. And just going back to what the Silicon Valley companies do, that's a way to poach talent. And so we have to be, as innovative in maintaining talent and making it interesting that our employees want to stay with IBM and recognize that there's not just a career path, but an education path for them for many, many years to come. So it's many programs we're doing in Africa, as we do all over the world, and we hope that that's going to be enough for now. Maybe we'll have to bring in massage chairs and other perks like our friends at Facebook and Google have.
Sadly, no massage chairs either. But I will say that first, I'll say the skills and capacity building within the offices is fantastic. And we've seen people, even in the 10 years we've been operating in Ghana, really move up the ranks using their own initiative and taking advantage of different training that we offer, both internally and externally. I think back on my own career. I mean, I think of the jobs I've had over my career. Yeah, I mean, I was a busboy, I was a waiter, I was a bartender, I cut lawns, I worked in a bottle factory. I mean, I had some terrible jobs that I learned a great deal from, but I didn't stop there. And I think people gave me opportunities over the years. I took advantage of them. I benefited, and I think similarly, when you see someone who's a driver or see someone who's a secretary, I don't see them in that role forever, especially when they're showing the initiative to be able to do more. So I think that our company is very progressive in offering opportunities to folks to really move up the food chain. But there's other, I mean, when you talk about fun things, I mean, I know that we also take great pride that we offer free lunch every day in, I think, in Mauritania and Senegal. I want to say Ghana too. And even in our Dallas office. And people are excited about it. The email goes around, lunch is out, and there's this huge stampede, whether you're in Dallas or Accra or Dakar or Nouakchott. And it's great because, I mean, who doesn't love free food? But it also creates a sense of community. Instead of people going out to lunch separately or going and eating lunch at their desks, it creates a sense of community. And it seems like a little something, but when the lunch goes around, but the relationships form from knowing that once a week when I'm in Dallas, I'm going to see everybody in the lunchroom on Wednesday afternoon is kind of neat. And So I think that's a little something, but it really, for me, is impactful. And along those same lines of food, like we really take our team building seriously. And you know, I was thinking about food. During our last gathering, our last team retreat, in addition to having a full day of discussing our strategy and our trajectory, we did we had all of our team get together and have a competitive cooking class. So I had a guy from Ghana on my team with someone from Senegal and somebody from Dallas, and we competed trying to make some really complicated meal against 3 other teams. And it was partly successful, partly disastrous.
Did you win?
But we won. I don't mean to brag, but we won the best croutons at that's probably my highest achievement as a professional. But it was a lot of fun. And I can't, I still picture my Ghanaian colleague. I was with him this weekend, but I can't get the image of him in a chef hat out of my head. So whether we're out in the bush in Ghana, meeting with local communities, we have that experience together. And I think it is, these are fun things that they're not massage chairs, but that was a fun team building exercise that I think really helped move us forward.
Absolutely, and I think Universal and IBM will have to consider the cooking competition as well. So we'll open up the rest of the panel to your questions. We're excited to hear from you and happy to start taking questions. I see one in the back here.
Thank you. I'm Sally from South Africa, and I've got a general question to everyone on the panel on just how much lobbying each of your companies does on domestic policy. So one of the things that was mentioned was immigration laws, and I know that in my country those are tightening quite a bit, especially for people coming from other parts of Africa, unfortunately. And so as a private entity, how do you guys go about lobbying to try and impact on the tightening of policies like that? And then the second question that I have is just to Kosmos Oil and Gas. Your website says that you work in Western Sahara and Morocco. How do you go about navigating that? Because I know that there's, the relations between those two, well, one's a territory and one's a colonial power, isn't so great. So what type of kind of lessons can you give us on how you walk that tightrope?
Jeff, you want to start?
Sure. Well, let me take the first question first and the second question second. In terms of lobbying, we're a pretty small team. I'm a one-man band here in Washington, so we really don't have a lobbying presence, but we rely greatly on associations, trade associations that we're members of. I'll give you a good example, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where we're members, where we're sitting right now, and they are fantastic in terms of their connections, their understanding of policy issues, and how domestic policy could affect our operations globally. We don't really have domestic operations other than our headquarters, so we look to the chamber to look toward, to forward our domestic agenda or keep an eye out for our priorities here. So, and they do that to a great degree. So they're fantastic partners. In terms of your second question, I mean, this comes down to all the countries in which we're operating. We have a unique set of challenges, and that could be said for the United States as well. But you've highlighted some of the real challenges there. I myself have a human rights background. When I was a diplomat before I was a business leader, and I actually worked in the Human Rights and Democracy Bureau of the State Department, working on challenging issues like Western Sahara and other issues. I think the way that Kosmos addresses our operations in each of our host governments is by trying to be as transparent as possible. We're members of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, so that all of our contracts are published online. All of our transactions in terms of what we're paying the governments are completely transparent. And we're very, very committed to that. And I would say also, we also work very closely with the government at the highest levels to make sure that the resources that we're paying in terms of taxes, in terms of royalties, are benefiting the entire nation, not just individuals in the capital, not just the federal government, also the local governments and local communities in which we operate. You talk about Western Sahara, it's a tightrope. I won't say it's easy. We work with the Moroccan government, and we work with the local governments in Western Sahara to make sure that when we're operating in these countries, we have the local interests, the local communities' interests in heart. Now, we haven't found anything there. I think if we were to find oil and gas, it would be an even larger challenge, but I would say a good one, to make sure that these resources benefit the local communities in which we operate. But it is a continuing challenge, and I would say, getting to know the local communities and their needs often leads us to go back to capital and say, hey, we think you should do X, Y, or Z. It's a tough conversation at times, but we feel as being committed and ethical stakeholders, it's our job to look out for the local communities in which we work. So that's our philosophy, and that's how we operate.
Michael or Mike, any comments on the lobbying question?
We lobby aggressively. We're very, very outspoken as a company. We consider ourselves a thought leader in many respects, so often governments come to us when they're formulating rules, regulations, legislation. We're also not shy about lobbying against laws that we think are misguided or could harm not just our interests, but the technology industry as a whole. So we have government affairs people in South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and Kenya in Africa. So we're doing quite a bit, and most of it is proactive. So helping these governments think through pro-innovation policies. Sometimes it's trying to reverse what we see as a bad policy.
And in our case, we're a supplier, so we're in the middle of the supply chain. I would say that the manufacturers are more of the heavy lobbyists. We're basically, in my department, we're two, a lady in Geneva and myself, and here in Virginia. And so we're a small group. We monitor more than we lobby. We're monitoring what's going on, and then we're there to support our customers when the opportunity arises, but small on the lobbying side.
Other questions?
Hi, thank you to the panel. This morning we talk a lot about respecting the rule of law, but also corruption. I want to bring in the issue of accountability. How do weak government hold strong companies, some of them wealthier than the state, richer than the state? How do government hold strong company accountable? And I'm bringing in the example of the Niger Delta with oil spill. So if any of the panelists can comment on this. And my second question is about climate change, right? How do you make sure that what you're doing is sustainable in community? Because there's this big push to our renewable energy, and many African government, they're struggling. You have to deal with development, but at the same time, not polluting. So how do you strike a balance between the two? Thank you.
Anyone want to take the question on corruption?
I don't mind starting. Foreign Corrupt Practice Act has been discussed earlier. We had an issue with that maybe 10 years ago. We have a very strict compliance program in place now. We're very open, with the integrity of the company, and I think that we have, corrected those issues. I know it was discussed on the panel earlier about going in and having an understanding with the locals as to how you're going to do business, and it's going to be in the proper way. So we've been through an episode like that. It was public information, and we've corrected it. And it wasn't a global thing. It was just a specific issue. But yeah, it's out there.
And I'll answer your question on what governments can do. We work with a lot of companies who are investing across Africa, including in Nigeria. And I think what governments can do is make their laws and rules very transparent to companies, so companies know how to operate and know that there are penalties if they operate outside of those bounds. Jeff, do you have thoughts on the environmental question? I don't know if Kosmos.
Sure.
Oh, of course. Yeah, Mike can answer that as well.
Go ahead, Jeff. You start. I'll come.
Let me first address the first point, because I think there is a lot that you can do, that people can do around anti-corruption. I actually read that there's a couple anti-corruption specialists here, so I don't want to presume to be the biggest expert in the room by any means, but I will say what I've found is that the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, when we're communicating every aspect of our contracts, journalists, scholars, academics, NGOs can really get a good sense on where the money is going and how much there is so that they can hold their governments accountable. You also talk about the other direction. How do you hold the companies accountable? And I think that is similarly something governments and NGOs should be keeping an eye on. When I go to a country to bid on a block, an offshore oil block, it's up to that government to judge which companies are most competitive. Well, sometimes the governments will say, okay, who's going to give us the most money? And I think what I would urge governments to do, having been in government, is also look at a track record, that company's track record across the globe. When I was in Liberia recently, I met with President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, very impressive. I've known her for a decade, or 2 decades, gosh. And I went to meet with her and she said, oh, Jeff, I'm so glad you're with Kosmos Energy. I'm happy to meet with you and we're old friends, but I also called President Mahama of Ghana to find out about your track record in Ghana. He was very happy with your operations there, your commitment to the community, your commitment to transparency, good governance, corporate social responsibility. I was amazed that she had done, even just a quick phone call shows a level of due diligence I often don't see on the continent. So here's a very forward-leaning leader looking to see not only are we going to come in with the highest bid, but what kind of company could she be getting into a business with. So I think it's the duty of governments to weigh in all aspects of the companies that are looking to operate.
That's right.
On the environmental side, I mean, in our case, we have good agricultural practices, GAP. We have a clear policy on that. It includes reforestation, it includes water, it includes pesticide usage, and so on. So we're very strict on that, just like we are our compliance program. I think the number, it's a staggering number. We've planted something on the order of 300 million trees in the last 10 years. Now, as I was sharing with one of the tables earlier, has every tree lived? No. But we can't police every tree that's out there. We can do our part of planting, but then the local has to, allow it to mature. So, 300 million trees is a lot of trees.
I think we have time for just one last question.
Yes. Thank you very much. My question to the panel is, I'm impressed that IBM has been able to stand up to discrimination and issues like that. Now, my question would be, as business, how would you advise us in the human rights sector to package our products in a way that business will be interested in investing in human rights advocacy?
Well, I'll just say that I think an important argument that needs to be made is that, and we make this here in the United States often, is policies that we see as discriminatory typically and very often drive away business. And if governments really do want to look out for the interests of their citizens and the economy, they have to be very careful what types of policies they implement. I know there are a lot of companies that will deter investments or pull out of countries because of laws that they see as unfair. For our history, IBM never invested in the South during segregation because we refused to sign up to state requirements around segregation of our workforce. So if you looked at IBM investments in the middle of this last century, it was all in the North where there were no segregation laws. So the South, because of these discriminatory racist laws, drove away on a company like IBM. So I think you need to make that argument that these types of laws are going to have a huge impact on business as companies look at this in a very close way.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but I want to thank all of you for participating in this discussion, thank our excellent panelists for taking the time to be with us today.